So we're going to get started. I'm just going to start off by giving a brief introduction of myself. Because of the time, I'm just going to rush through my section and just give George and Philip an opportunity. They've been involved in a couple of interviews for various candidates for a couple of years now. And there's usually something that you see students tend to make as mistakes. And we just thought to equip you with these fundamentals before you can actually step into the time where you have to do an interview. So the title of today's session is How Not to Ruin Your Job Interview. So now I want to encourage you to listen attentively. We're going to have two prizes. The first prize is going to be 1,000 rands that we're going to be giving out. And then the second prize is going to be a prize of 500 rands. So what we're going to be doing is going to give you a quiz, which is going to be based on what we've presented. So listen attentively. It's going to be an exciting Menti quiz. So just to start off with, just a brief look at the agenda. What we're going to be looking at, we're going to be starting off with a brief introduction of who we are as IntelliFX, and then I'm going to give you some interview advice, and then thereafter, I'm going to give a testimonial from one of the students from Stellenbosch University that we have helped. We've helped a couple of students, but we thought of actually bringing someone just to show you that, hey, we live among you. We are part of you. And then thereafter, we're going to give Mazars, Financial Services Africa, a time slot just to come and give you some insights of who they are as a company and also some of their top advice, interview advice. And then we're going to have our Menti quiz. And then after that, you can get in touch with us. We have some flyers here that you can grab as you go out, where you can just scan your QR code. It can tell you about us, and then you can access some of our services. I'm going to skip the first couple of slides, and I'm just going to go into a little bit more about IntelliFX, who we are. IntelliFX stands for Help Students Transition into a Phase Where They Live Industry-Focused Education. By introduction, I'm actually finishing off my PhD in industrial engineering, so I am part of you. But at the same time, I'm also a co-founder of this startup, which has helped nearly 20 students to find jobs within the corporate space in various ways. And Rates is going to be sharing one of the unique models that we've been trying to position into the corporate space as to try to help you make your education more practical, and he'll talk more into that. But who we are is we connect startups and corporates to engineering students or graduates or working professionals that are looking for employment. All right? And why do we care for you? We care for you because we understand that job searching is frustrating. It's frustrating, I don't want to lie. And it's frustrating because you need certain career fundamentals. And we as Interlife, we not only care about placing you in the job environment, we want to help you to build the following career fundamentals, career planning, your CV and cover letter writing. We want to help you with your job interview presentation, as well as your preparation. And then we also want you to have exposure to job opportunities. So Mazars, Financial Services Africa is one of our partners. They are one of our partners among the other partners we have. And we've been working for a while now, and they have been hiring a couple of industrial engineers since last year. What value do we offer to you? So we have a platform, and our platform is to say, if you're an engineer, just upload your CV, right? And when you upload your CV, the partners that the corporates that we're partnered with, they all are looking for engineering individuals to hire. If they find a match for you, they will contact you directly. Or another opportunity that you can use is a functionality where you can just browse some of our existing job functionality. So we do have our website details on the flyers. And so I'm just going to jump right into it with regards to what we do. But before we jump into that, I'm just going to call on Rates just to come and give us a 5-minute testimonial about his experience with Interlife.
All right, so hi everyone. My name's Rates, like the Rates Hall. Yeah, it wasn't named after me, but anyway. Okay, so I would just like to quickly take the time to sort of very briefly tell you about my personal experiences with the Interlife Initiative and Rodney's company and what they did for me personally, and then just to end off with my verdict whether I would advise any of you to take that on in your own lives. Okay, so I summarized the 5 main things that I got out of this initiative personally. So firstly, what they did was, as Rodney already said, the beginning of last year, they met with me and they essentially had a lot of meet and greets with me, tried to gain understanding who am I, what are my skills, what are my talents, what do I like to do. And then they took that information, they went into industry to search for a company where I would be a good fit. They found such a company in Stellenbosch, which is a management consulting company. And then through various interactions with that company, they were able to arrange a bursary agreement for myself through this company. And then that flows into my second point, which is industry experience. So not only did this company give me a bursary, they also gave me industry experience in which during my full-time masters, I could take a few days a week and then go work for this company. So I did full-time masters and part-time work through them. This gave me, I can't emphasize how much experience this gave me and confidence. And that all while doing my masters. And then I didn't do this for free. I got a salary, of course. So on top of the bursary, I was able to earn even more money while working at the same time, not having to waiter, but actually work towards my greater career as a whole, thanks to Interlife. And then fourthly, they gave me loads of academic and professional support. So this was in the form of where they ensured that the employer, the company that they found for me, doesn't take too much of my time so that I can still mainly focus on my masters. I must say I had a few bumps with my studies and they every time swept in, explained the situation to the employer, and every time everything worked out smoothly and I didn't really have to get involved with that sort of struggle and trying to get them to understand my points. And then they also gave a lot of development, I can learn who am I in terms of what I want to become. Without them asking me those type of questions, I definitely wouldn't have known myself without having to first think about that. And then lastly, they ensure that I have job security when I leave the university. So end of this year, hopefully when I get my master's, I can walk into a job full-time, one that they procured for me that is specifically tailored for my skills and talents. And then just to end off, my verdict would definitely be, if you are industrial engineer or any other engineer, I think all engineering directions are welcome. Definitely consider this initiative for yourself. If it wasn't for this, I wouldn't have developed and progressed as much as I have over the past 18 months. As I said, I would definitely recommend this to anyone that's interested. Come and get a flyer. It won't hurt to try it. So I give it a thumbs up. So enjoy the rest of the interview-based session. Cheers.
All right, so before I hand over to George, I'm just going to summarize the key pointers that I've come up with based on my interactions with a couple of students in interviews. I want to ask you something. If you think about life, and I tell you a concept, and this concept is something that you touch and you feel every day, right? And you need to explain that concept to someone. That's scenario number one. And then scenario number two, I tell you about a concept audibly. You don't get to see or touch it, and you have to explain it to someone. When are you going to find it easier to explain to that person? In scenario one or scenario two? Any takers? Scenario one. Why? Because you can relate to it, right? And a lot of the times, you're taught in university to learn concepts, but you're not really taught to do self-research. So when you go in an interview, what you do is you go online and you say, what are the top tips of interviewing? And then you find there, I'm not going to name them because we might be talking about some of them, but when you go to the interview, we can see when someone has just Googled how to do an interview, but they haven't done self-research. So what we want to let you know is if you can do self-research of reflecting on yourself, when you go in an interview, no one is going to tell you to be confident, because you're going to be confident because you can relate with yourself, with that self-research. So one of the aspects that we look in self-research is we encourage you to visually map down, right? Get a document or a report where you just do an assessment of yourself, right? And there's a concept where we call mapping your life story. If there's something that industry wants, it wants to know what value can you give to them. Because if you can bring value to them, they will most likely take you because you're going to solve their problems. But if you are going to go to them and you're going to say, okay, what do you want me to do? And you don't articulate what value you bring, then you're not going to stand out. And you don't feel confident because you haven't done the self-research. And we want to summarize just some pointers of what you can do with your self-research. Know your top 5 talents. Know your top 5 values as a person. Know your top 5 motivational circumstances. And what you can do is you can just reflect on your life. Look at the time from when you were in your high school to the time when you maybe start off with your primary school, go to your high school, to the time where you're in university. And try to look at all of the success moments where you really did well. And people came and said, wow, you really did well in this. And then I want you to write down in that phase, for each phase, what were the top talents that are utilized? What were the top motivational circumstances? And by motivational circumstances, I mean, what did I have around me that encouraged me to utilize my talents, right? So I can give an example. As for me, I found that I'm really good at communicating and presenting. But when I reflect on my life journey, I realize that every time before I present, I bounce off my ideas with someone who is knowledgeable about the subject. And by doing that, I'm always confident when I present. So that someone that I bounce off my ideas is my motivational circumstances. So now when I'm about to utilize these talents, I know what I need around me. And your values. If you're going to go into an industry, you're going to find that if you're always acting against your values, you'll feel frustrated. So you need to say to yourself, what values am I willing to compromise? What values am I not willing to compromise? And whenever you're faced with a big decision, you then map out and say to yourself, how can I implement my values where I'm going? All right, so that's where the aspect of self-research comes in. Then you identify your top 5 talents. And then after that, what you do is you come up with a list of your top 5 talents and then go to your peers, go to people that are really close to you. To them, okay, based on your interactions with me, what would you say are my top 5 talents? What would you say are my top 5 motivational circumstances? This is where you get peer review. Now then, at the end of the day, you compare your peer review with what you have come up with, and then you come up with your final documented list of your top 5 values, your top 5 talents, and your top 5 motivational circumstances. And then, when you can do that, try to look at times in your experiences where you utilize these talents. Because the thing is, in the interview, most people say, I'm a good communicator, but you don't illustrate where you utilize those talents or those skills. So like, how do I know that you are not just copying one of the talents that you know we need in our industry? So always articulate a scenario where you utilized whatever value you say you bring to the sector, all right? And then after that, then only then, start setting up career goals for yourself, right? Where do I want to be in the next 2 years, the next 3 years? And then as you do that, you then say, where am I as an individual? For where I want to be, what skills are needed? And then you do what we call skill gap identification. And whilst you're still studying, try to do outside courses. Do a course on Udemy, for example, for that role, so that when you're in an interview, the individual that is interviewing can see you as someone who is initiative-driven. So start doing now what you need to reach to your goal. And then the last phase I'll give you before I hand over to George and Philip is the aspect of your value articulation, right? As a person, you're going to find it easier to articulate something that you can relate to. And that's where this self-research comes in. Don't just go to an interview and just Google what is the top 5 advice. Spend time getting to know yourself, getting to know what value you can bring. And then, when you go to an industry, articulate scenarios where you used whatever value you're saying you bring. Is that making sense? I'm trying to simplify it as much as I can. And then, One aspect that you can do today, I encourage you, is to build a personal brand. You know, platforms such as Quora, social media platforms. Build a social brand where you are becoming an expert in something. People are posting questions on those platforms, then you start to answer them. When you go to an interview, you say, hey, I'm an expert in this. Here's the evidence. Look at this digital platform where I'm constantly helping society to answer questions that they have. And then when you do that, you will stand out. So just to give you a tip, I'm going to be giving you the Menti quiz on this slide. So it's off. The slide that I was just showing there. Okay, I'm going to hand over to George and Philip.
Okay. Great, thank you, Rodney, for inviting us, and thank you to the engineers and others in the room that eagerly awaiting probably one of the most complex things you're going to do in your lifetime, which is start a career. I always say it's probably two things that are highly unpredictable. The one is your career, and the other one is let's call it your wife. But maybe for the students that are female, it could be the husbands as well. So those two things totally tricky to navigate during life. So it's quite interesting to see that there's both industrial engineers as well as other engineering practice areas in the room. Some of our best engineers are not necessarily industrial engineers. So I've got an engineer out at, or a bunch of engineers out at ABSA, digitizing the bank, and one of them is a mechanical engineer. And he's now doing code and telling ABSA what they should look like. I guess what's very interesting is that he's only been out of varsity for a year, and now he's already re-engineering large parts of ABSA and making a difference. So that's how powerful the next few years are going to be in your life. Yes. And so my own background, started my own consulting firm in the late 90s. So hence you probably won't relate to me at all. I'm a lot older than most of the people in the room. So Philip will do most of the talking, as he's still a fairly fresh engineer, I guess, from varsity. What is that, about 10 years, I guess, Philip? Yeah. And so then moved to ABSA for 10 years, where I ran large parts of ops and tech. And then for Deloitte, started their financial services practice and process engineering practice. Did that for 10 years. And just before COVID pandemic, I sort of moved over to Mazars to do the same for them in South Africa, Africa, and Middle East. So lots of mileage. But I think why Rodney thought it would be a good idea is we probably interview, for me in the last 20 years, I've interviewed probably between 500 and 750 engineers to create engineering practices in large corporates, or to recruit them as part of my own team at Deloitte or now at Mazars. And probably only about 10% of those interviews make it through to the next step, which might sound depressing, but I think this is what Rodney is trying to do with us, adding some value into your life today. Philip?
Sure. Thanks for that, George. So I suppose a very brief introduction about myself is I'm a consultant by nature, so I hate standing still and just working in the same spot ad infinitum. So I started off my career in Deloitte as a young consultant. I built up, let's say, a reputation for being able to deal with difficult customers, and they shipped me off to public sector and then to mining sector, where I sort of learned the hell out of everything related to supply chain management. At some point in the game, George asked me to come and help build up this business we like to call Mazars Financial Services Engineering. And I've had the opportunity, so in the, I think, 3 years that I've been here, I've had more clients in more different industries than I had in the entirety of my career up until that point, which was crazy to think about, but it's simply because we have a fairly rapid project turnover, at least in the space that I manage. So we work in just about everything from manufacturing, banking, insurance, telecommunications, education. The sky's literally the limit to what we do and what we don't do. And it's given me a lot of freedom to sort of build the business that I fundamentally believe in. So coming back to how I started my career, when I was an industrial engineer, George had started a business, a chapter of engineers in Deloitte that was referred to as the process factory. And the fundamental business model was the same, where we'd take young engineers and go and put them in business and let them re-engineer the world, right? And you have phenomenal growth opportunity in that space, both because you're being exposed to a lot of clients and a lot of really knowledgeable professionals in the Deloitte platform, but also because you're given a lot of responsibility in the client interface. So you're not just doing a day job, you're doing something that's meaningful and transformative to the client's environment. So that's why consulting was attractive to me, but I'm not here to sell you consulting today. So I will very briefly introduce Mazars as a company. So we're built on the Mazars Africa and Middle East platform. It's a co-ownership between Mazars Global and Mazars Africa. So we intend to leverage the, let's say, the African client base and Mazars network to on-sell the services that we offer. And we're trying to do something really, really meaningful. So speaking to our vision, we're trying to do something really, really meaningful from a business engineering perspective, right? So we think engineers, and like being an engineer myself, we think differently about problems, and we think that, and we believe that the way that engineers think, if you apply that in business, right, not just to solve practical problems on the ground as to how do I get call from point A to call point B, how do I take resource A and turn that into resource B, how do I make that move this truck from point A to point B as efficiently as possible, but how do I manage organizations, how do I transform the organization? So we think the way that engineers look at problems and take them apart and then put them back together to a solution, that fundamental skill is something that businesses urgently need. We've seen the results of the work that we do. So we don't just deliver a PowerPoint presentation. When we walk away, we try and really make an impact to the businesses that we serve and the world at large. So there's a play to the broader community. So that's, I suppose, our vision and why we're looking for industrial engineers specifically for Mazars, but engineers in general. And our value proposition is that we try and be startup minded, right? So we believe that if you're in a flexible environment, it gives you freedom of thought. And you're not constrained to, let's say, set ideologies or set principles of a established and, let's say, fossilized business. And having that type of business internally allows us to have that mentality when we serve our clients as well. And we give our engineers a portion of that business to own and help us grow, right? And that's our core value proposition, over and above the, having a really attractive company culture, which I'll get to in a little bit later. That's who Mazars is in let's say, a coconut shell. But yeah, so what we wanted to do with this session, so just moving on to, I suppose, what you're all really here for, is to how to not ruin a job interview, right? So I didn't want to talk about the very obvious things like dress code, professionalism, or making a good impression. And I also didn't want to repeat the things that we covered in the podcast we did cooperatively with Rodney. That podcast covered the topics of, being confident, owning your space, and understanding the intent of the questions being asked. So we wanted to bring something slightly different to the table today, and sort of what we're speaking with you about, so that you have as many resources and ideas and as much as you possibly can to formulate sort of how do you want to walk into the job interview when you've you finally get there, right? So I'm assuming the most of you will probably have a job interview within the next 8 months. So I'm going to start off with company culture, and then I'm going to hand over to George because he's also got a couple of talking points. So company culture is, I put on the slide, letting yourself know what you're in for. But there's a culture framework that I like to use, which is sort of taking a business into splitting into 4 quadrants in terms of internal versus external and vocation versus capability, right? And if you're looking at the internal vocation, it's all about sort of how does it treat you as an individual, an employee? How does it invest in you as an employee? So that's things like what is your, and this is on the softer side because it's vocational, right? So it's about how does it treat you as an employee? You don't want to necessarily end up in, let's say, the fast-moving consumer goods environment where you're always on call. Your work-life balance is not a priority to that company, right? And there's the worst case scenario is that you get organizations where it's almost a game to see who can accrue the most leave before company is forced to pay it out, right? And if you're young and you want to pursue a career aggressively and that is your priority, that might be what you need to let yourself in for, to get that experience as quickly as possible as a foundation. But that might not be attractive to you. So you need to be deliberate and in terms of what are you letting yourself in for, right? And these are the types of questions that you want to ask when you going into an interview. So George has a talking point around, it's a two-way street. So this cultural mindset is what I would have you have in the back of your mind when you're going into these interviews, because it's not going to be on the company website, right? This is the stuff that you can't research, and you need to have a human-on-human interaction to get this sort of information. Rodney, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Fantastic. So there's on the sort of internal capability perspective, it's about how does the company invest in you? Are they going to sort of give you formal training around certain capabilities that's attractive, not just to the business that you're in now, but to other businesses, right? Does that training align to the skill set that you want to apply over your career and specialize in, right? So there's a leadership growth element, which you'll find under how does it invest in you as an individual on the soft side, and then there's a skills mastery perspective, which is about growing and developing skills that make you attractive to other in the marketplace in general, and collectively those things influence your perceived value in the market, right? So whatever training and certified training is obviously very attractive that company offers you is something that you definitely need to be on the lookout for. Then moving to the external environment, you might want to be sensitive to how that company plays and participates in the industry at large, right? If it's a company that's purely internally, that's purely introspective, and that it only worries about its own ability to do what it does and doesn't participate in a community of businesses, that might be somewhat restrictive, right? And there's also the element of social responsibility. So is this company at an ethical level in the way that it participates and contributes to society, a business that you're interested in joining? And then on the external competences, does what you do in the business and how that affects what the company is offering to its clients, does that align to your career growth objectives, right? To your own career goals. So that's more or less what I want to just cover very briefly in terms of what you need to be aware of from a company culture perspective.
Good. Thanks, Philip. I used to be a lecturer in strategy at one of the business schools many years ago. And I've forgotten what the blank stares from the crowd looks like. But I hope you guys are finding at least some value from it. Yeah, so I think although Philip has mentioned the interview is a two-way street, you need to be quite comfortable that you have interviewed the company as well. So one of the best jobs I ever got was an extreme two-way conversation with the individual that was doing the interview with me. I never experienced it as an interview. It was basically a conversation around what are the guys up to? What are they doing? Does a day in the life look like for an individual joining that company? And asking about it. Look, you need to looking and being interested in what they're saying and exploring what they say. Otherwise, it becomes sort of a question answer session. And I guess most of those interviews never really become successful. And what I'm also intimating by that is to say that work relationship that will develop over years is already tested in that first interview, which is to see how do you actually fit, how do you relate to the individual that you're being interviewed by. And I think the other thing is mostly those individuals that have got lots of experience, but you need to go in with the 5 things you want to land in terms of the messaging around you. So think about a billboard driving from Stellenbosch to Cape Town. You're basically holding up your billboard saying, here I am. You need to be quite clear on what's on that billboard and get that delivered almost come hell or high water if you can during the interview. Otherwise, you're basically at the mercy of some predetermined questionnaire that someone has potentially prepared. So don't be overly pushy on getting your points across, but create the environment where you can make comments around what that is. And I think the other one is entrepreneurship versus intrapreneurship. And I think Philip will explain a little bit more about that. But let me give my last bit, Philip, which is bring color to the interview. Now, do you hang off cliffs over weekends and jump off our aeroplanes? Do you cook up a storm with your partners or your friends over weekends? Do you like traveling? All of that stuff that makes you quite unique and individual. So because you're going to bring that to work as well. So if you cook, expect to be cooking for people at a breakaway or something. Or if you're playing the guitar, when we go away for a strategy session, we might ask you to bring it along. We might ask you to arrange something over the weekend where we all jump off cliffs and go and have some fun and adrenaline rush. So make sure that you bring that color to the interview as well. Who are you? I guess that color just needs to be calibrated. So if you're interviewing for a laboratory job, where fewer elements of a wild personality is required, don't go super wild like these guys can't identify with you. But if you're interviewing for a job that is deeply problem-solving orientated, show that that's something that you're interested in. You're reading books around it. What have you lately read around that? So, color in the interview as much as you can. And you're the one with the crayons in the room, because the boss is just going to ask you sort of straight line questions. Philip?
I think what I can add to this thing about coloring yourself in and tying that to what we mean by internet, how that's relevant to entrepreneurship versus intrapreneurship, is that you need to be relatable to the interviewee, right? So especially in the consulting industry, you're going to be put in front of clients. So essentially what I'm vetting you for is your ability to stand up in front of that client and be interesting as a human, right? Not just as a professional. The professional part goes without saying, right? But being legitimately interesting as a human is important. And there's a element where we're testing you for that as part of the interview, right? To make that almost critical. And that ties into entrepreneurship, which is about leveraging networks. So you're never going to work in a basement where nobody ever looks at you, right? At best, you get to work in your home office with your camera on, right? And being able to network within the business that you're placed in, not just in your department, but also in other departments, and get people to do things for you, right? Building relationships and leveraging those relationships to get things done is a critical skill. There's something called the 4 directions of management, where downwards management is where you delegate. Sideways management is about managing your peers and people at the same relative level as you in the organization, and upwards management where you're managing your manager, right? Managing your boss. And your ability to display that skill is something that's also quite important to demonstrate in the context of an interview. And then I suppose as a bonus, I'll just say that you might want to be sensitive to the management style of the organization. I find that people who micromanage you will probably let you stagnate in your career quite quickly. And then you also want to test the organization for its drive towards continuous improvement. In other words, are they open to using new technologies and exposing you to things that are happening not on the bleeding edge of the industry, but perhaps on the leading edge of the industry, so that you're not, again, stagnating in your career, and that you grow. You can only grow with the company if the company is growth orientated. So food for thought in that context.
Thank you, George. Let's give them a round of applause. Okay, so that's a round of applause for you, George and Philip. All right, take out your phones. The time for winning the money is here. Okay, so the winners can come to the front and collect their cash. You've got your 1,000 gift here. You've got your 500. To see if you're listening. Okay, so let's start. Are you in? Yeah. All right, question number 1. Oh, wow. Is anyone still joining? Okay, 30 seconds, because we've got another class after this. Okay, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, first question. Answer fast to get as many points. Which industry does Mazars Financial Services Engineering not participate in? Okay. Correct. It's healthcare. Let's see our leaderboard. Okay, next question. Second question. Select one of the 3 pieces of advice discussed by Philip during the podcast he referred to. So you mentioned a podcast, and just select one of the 3 pieces of advice. Okay, correct. So the correct answer was own your space. You gotta own your space. Okay, second last question. You're near winning your cash prize. Second last question. Select one of the pieces of advice discussed by Mazars during the presentation. So it was showing on the slides, yeah. This one is easy. To see if you're listening. Understand your company culture. All right. Last question. Are you ready for your last question? Select a step which was not discussed by Rodney during the presentation. So I gave you a tip. I said this slide is going to be the Menti quiz. All right, all right. So let's drum roll. Let's see our winners. Waldo, can you come to the front? Thank you. Congratulations. You see the instructions there. You just send us an email.
Thank you very much.
Gemma, can you come to the front? Who's Gemma? All right. You're fine. Just send us an email. All right. Thank you, everybody. Collect your flyers here and keep in touch with us.